It's time to peel back the layers of real estate. Find a better deal, propertyonion.com.
Hi, I'm Tony Stern, co-owner and president of propertyonion.com, alongside my partner Damon Simon. On June the 8th, 2023, the Florida Supreme Court handed down a 91-day rehabilitative suspension against Bruce Jacobs, the famous, or some in the Florida Judicial might say infamous, Miami-based foreclosure defense lawyer. The Florida Supreme Court claimed, and it was upheld, that Bruce Jacobs made statements in 3 separate legal proceedings that impugn the integrity of members of the judiciary, and that he failed to show that he had objectively reasonable factual basis for making such statements. I say that he pissed off too many people in the judiciary and the big bank lobbyists. I first met Bruce in 2012 in the aftermath of the US prime lending crisis. I was a member of a syndicate buying foreclosure properties. Bruce was the syndicate's defense attorney, working to keep the lenders at bay while we rented out the acquired properties. I didn't keep in close contact with Bruce, as that was the job of the syndicate manager at the time, but over the years I watched from afar as Bruce took on what, to my mind, was extreme cases of fraud brought by the banks against the disenfranchised and minorities in our society, who were in danger of losing their properties and all that entailed. Several cases I read about left me disgusted, and more than once I reached out to Bruce by email, offering our platform support in any way it could. Watching Bruce then get attacked by the big bank interests and, coincidentally, the judiciary, for fighting too hard for the little person in the street, struck a chord that again prompted us to offer support to highlight these unfair practices. After Bruce was suspended, I reconnected with Bruce in the flesh, so to speak, through a mutual business connection. It was quickly apparent that Bruce has so much to offer the nation's property investors through education that A, I wanted him to join us here at propertyonion.com, and B, I wanted you to meet and understand Bruce Jacobs yourself. Here is the full, unedited interview with Bruce Jacobs. Bruce.
Tony.
You recently underwent a 91-day rehabilitative period imposed by the Florida Supreme Court, allowing you to reflect on specific legal matters. Can you tell us a bit about the challenges that you faced during this time?
So I'll say it like this. It has been such a meaningful break for me. Like, I am so grateful for it, because I was in a fight that was not going to end until somebody won or lost. And I don't know if the battle's lost or just the war or whatever it is, but right now, like, I got to put down a rock that I had been carrying for 15 years, fighting for homeowners and investors and whoever was that was in one of my clients. You know, like, I took it to the door because I believed in what I was doing. I believed that you know, it mattered that they did it right. And I think that's just what the rule of law is all about. So, you know, it's been, in some ways, hard. You know, I'll acknowledge there's been some moments of where you know, you have to remind yourself, like, you know, this is a path, you're on a path, and, you know, this is what was meant for you to go through, you're going to go through it. You know, and getting up every morning, going to services, going to meditate, going to exercise, doing the things that I know are what I was doing when I was in the fight, just to keep it going. You know, to me, like, there's another door is opening just as that one is closing, and who knows how it's going to play out. Like, I went through something for a reason, and, you know, I have no regrets about it. I just feel like, you know, I wish that things turned out differently, and they still may.
Sure. But even saying that, You've engaged in an amended RICO and Fair Housing Act lawsuit against major banks in Hawaii, federal court, to address some foreclosure issues.
Yeah. So
But I was going to say to you, but explain what drives your interest in this area and how you hope to make a positive difference.
So I got into foreclosures 15 years ago when the crash happened in '08. And I was a prosecutor in Miami. I was someone who knew how to try cases. I knew how to do discovery. I was a lawyer that was going to fight. And I always was like, that's going to make a difference for me, for my clients. And it did in lots of ways. And what I found was that, the more that I hit brick walls in front of certain courts and, doing things here or there that, some judges agreed, some judges didn't. But I kept coming up with new ways to go to federal court because that's where this all really belongs. All my work is, showing that there are national banks doing things nationally that are wrong. And this RICO lawsuit in Hawaii is basically like the last thing I did right after they suspended me is when we filed this RICO lawsuit in Hawaii that puts everything that we know in court and let them figure it out in the federal court system. Maybe Florida doesn't agree, but that's Florida's right. But federal judges are federal judges. They have their own mandate to uphold the Constitution. And I think that like I said, everything that I've worked on all these years has been from a place of you can't take people's home using fake evidence. Can't lie in court. You can't lie to judges. And that I knew was going to be a challenge because I'm dealing with powerful people. But sometimes you gotta stand up for something you believe in.
Well, that actually leads me on to my next question. So the integrity of the judicial system is something that everyone cares about. How do you see your role in maintaining the integrity in Florida? And especially given some concerns that former justices have had.
So, I think that what we're seeing in Florida is, something they're fighting about the same thing right now in Israel. In Israel today, they are out in the streets by the hundreds of thousands because they're trying to protect what they believe is a cornerstone of democracy, which we all believe, which is fair and impartial judges. And there are some former Florida Supreme Court justices who, when all this was happening with foreclosures a decade ago and there was all this fraud going on, they came after the liberal judges on the bench. And those judges have been saying what's happening in Florida is a perversion. It threatens the rule of law. And to me, my work was standing in that truth. If you, as a lawyer, you swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, you swear an oath that if you see someone, a lawyer or a judge, that's not following the ethics, the code of ethics, that you report it. And the Constitution, First Amendment, is supposed to protect you at the highest levels. There is no higher rung of constitutional protection than for a lawyer discussing legitimate problems in their cases. And that to me is always been my truth. I am exposing legitimate problems in the court system, and I should be protected, as a Fair Housing Act whistleblower, as a First Amendment lawyer. There's so many reasons why what I'm doing is designed to put the fire out, not burn it down.
Sure. I mean, your advocacy for marginalised communities has been evident in your past comments. Can you share your insights into how the legal landscape might become more inclusive and sensitive to the needs of these diverse groups?
I think that what you see in the world today, right, is America, Florida, is becoming so diverse. It's not just black and brown people, or there's communities that are filled with mixed families and all kinds of. It's not just a majority situation anymore. Everything's growing and changing.
Sure.
And, my work was always about, the least amongst us. Like I have a black teacher that paid her mortgage to Bank of America and lost her home anyway, even after we won the trial. And the judge said she was not going to be fair and impartial, and they sold her house. And to me, like the fact that they could do that to, someone who is, I don't know if she would have been treated the same if she was not, an elderly black woman, widow. But those are the people that you got to fight for, And
Sure, no.
I think whatever it is that, we're seeing in Florida or we're seeing across the nation now, I think America is stronger and better when, all of us are, following those ideals of, we're all one country, we're all brothers.
Sure, no, absolutely. How could you disagree with that? I mean, you've often referred to the wisdom of historical figures, like James Madison. How does the principle of the separation of powers inspire you in your work? And how do you believe it's reflected in Florida's governmental structure?
Well, I mean, what I see in Florida right now is something that I think James Madison and Thomas Jefferson would be very unhappy with, right? And James Madison wrote, some of the Federalist Papers, and one of the Federalist Papers he wrote talks about the fact that you can't have a government run by one group, even one person, one group, once you have all three branches of government under control of one organization or one person, that's tyranny. And Thomas Jefferson was warning that banks will one day leave us homeless and penniless in the nation our fathers founded. And that has always resonated with me because if you look at what's happening today, I think everyone agree that in Florida there's a supermajority in the legislature that's doing the bidding of the governor, and the courts. One of the things that Peggy Quince, the former justice, was talking about was how all our judges are selected by nominating committees that are filled with Federalist Society members, and they're picking Federalist Society members. And she says that's bad for democracy, and I agree because our system works based on everyone protecting each other's rights. Everyone, I teach a class in scouting called Citizenship in the Nation. I've been doing it for years. I'm a scoutmaster for my daughter's troop. And it talks about, I talk about how like my favorite article in the Constitution is Article 6. Everyone looks at me like, why do you even have a favorite? I'm like, because that's the one where everybody swears to uphold the Constitution. And I think the world would be a much better place if we had leaders in all branches of government that were really held to that. And, I think if we believe that right now the purpose of government is to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, and to promote the general welfare, I think we're failing on all four of those things. And I don't know very many people who disagree with me.
History teaches us many lessons. How do you draw from historical events to inform your efforts to defend constitutional rights, and what principles guide your practice?
That's a good question. I mean, to me, history has taught us, and go back to the Bible even, like there's all this passages in the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, whatever you follow, talking about how you need judges, and what a judge should be and what they shouldn't be. And, the idea that they were describing that problem thousands of years ago, and it's still every day you have to try to uphold the highest standards. I mean, you got Clarence Thomas right now is, they keep reporting on, all kinds of things that make no sense to a lot of other judges who know that doesn't help. And to me, the idea is, it goes back to the Magna Carta, it was hundreds of years ago where, people were on the field of battle saying, you can't take my property without due process. And they made a king sign a document that says, okay, I'll stop doing that. And, when you really understand, to me as a lawyer, my job, I believe, is, like a guardian of democracy. Like my job is to kind of, make sure that I see injustice and I go and try to undo it. And I think that, one thing that's caused so much heartache in the nation for years now has been the crash of '08, and all of the people that were lost everything, all the communities of color that were set back, generational wealth for decades, they got set back. And all of this to me is like, when you start to resonate an energy that is, we're not following the Constitution, we're not doing, that's when everything starts to fall apart. And when it's all the more important to get out there and do your part to make it better.
I mean, your concern for protecting constitutional rights is very evident, obviously. Can you tell us more about how you approach these issues and share some examples of how you've worked to uphold your clients' rights?
So, to me, the issue has always been that you have, you borrowed money in a foreclosure, they didn't pay it back, they're going to foreclose, fine. That's how it should be. And I used to work for banks for years, but then you see them coming to court and they're not telling the truth, and they're cheating in lots of different ways, and they're not paying their taxes that make the mortgages enforceable. There's all kinds of things that I've found over the years. And at the end of the day, all you can really do is impress upon the person that's sitting there in the robe, hey, this is not allowed. This shouldn't be allowed. I don't care what cause of action it is. You shouldn't be allowed to do this in criminal court. You shouldn't be allowed to do this in civil court. And I can go on for hours about the stories of the people I've helped, the people that have, been able to stay in their homes, to save their homes, to get deals that could work out, whatever was going on. Like, to me, the adversarial process is about creating better outcomes. And once you have a breakdown in that, once your adversary is not being held to the same rules and the same laws, and all you could do is go and say, hey, but wait, there's a Constitution, and it says you shall not be deprived of your life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and that is intended to be, upheld. I mean, that's the whole system, right? Once we start allowing that kind of thing to happen, then we're talking about very different systems, and usually those systems don't end.
Well, it's funny because it segues into one of my next questions for you, which is, I know that, as you've just said, you're committed to upholding the Constitution and defending individual rights. Could you expand on your personal philosophy? I know you've given some just now, on how it aligns with the broader goals of our judicial system as it stands right now.
So, like I said, in the preamble of the Constitution, it says the first thing you're supposed to do as a government is establish justice, right? And that, when you think about there was a story by a woman, author, a New York Times reporter, Gretchen Morgenstern, 2016 it was, and she was talking about how the vast majority of people who are angry with the system are people that went through foreclosures. I mean, look at January 6th. The vast majority of those people that were in the Capitol had foreclosures and tax liens and financial problems. And, to me, there is a better way, right? There's no reason why we can't have justice, why we can't hold, if a bank is doing something and they get caught doing it and they promise the federal government to stop and they don't, then you could use that to create money for affordable housing. You could use that to, give opportunities to help people instead of just letting them roll through because they're banks and, God forbid, anything happens. At some point it breaks the system if you have if people are unaccountable. You can't allow that. In my heart.
Well, there's an intriguing quote from Shakespeare, one of my favourite authors, that you've referenced before regarding lawyers.
Right.
How do you see it relating to contemporary attitudes towards legal professionals? And what are your thoughts on maintaining the dignity and importance of today's legal profession?
So the quote is, the first thing you do is you kill all the lawyers.
I didn't want to say that.
I know.
I left that
But
to
I
you.
felt it was appropriate.
Sure.
You know, and what does that mean? Like, what are they talking about? Are they mad at lawyers? No. I think that the whole idea of that quote was that if you get rid of the people who understand what the law is, what the rules are, how to organize other people to say you can't do this. And once those people are out of the way, then guess what? You could do it. And that never bodes well for anyone except for the people in power, the people in control. You know, and to me, like, I wish that all these people out there on both sides fighting about freedom and talking about who wears the shirt with the biggest flag on it or whatever. Like, when you actually come down to it, if you're not going to be able to hold a powerful person accountable to the law, then you're not free. You know, and that is, what they don't want people to know. Like, I can say without hesitation that lawyers who are doing the work on my side, I know at least half a dozen of them: Mark Stopa, Kenneth Trent, Kelly Bosecker. There's Darren Lentner. There's a whole bunch of them that I know who are not practicing law anymore, and I know that there's a whole bunch of lawyers on the other side that are doing things that you should be disbarred for, and they're not, and they're still practicing law. So, to me, the idea of what Shakespeare was talking about, and look, at some point, your arguments just are more unique ways of expressing the same thing. Can't take people's property with fake evidence and false testimony.
Sure.
And it's worth fighting that, because at the end of the day, you need one judge to agree with you. Maybe it's this RICO case in Hawaii. Well, as a man of faith, someone who's been doing this for a long, long time, I believe everything happens in its perfect time, and I'm going through this now because that's what I'm supposed to go through. But, I have faith that it's going to be exactly what it's supposed to be.
Given that's all gone before you personally, what would you do differently?
So I think at this juncture, the thing that I got myself into the most trouble for was trying to show that there are certain judges who agree with what I'm doing and are saying that there's unclean hands, which is things that reasonable and honest men would condemn. That's the language that they use in the law. And when there were judges who were disagreeing with them, I was saying they weren't being fair. I was saying they weren't being impartial. I was making this about the judges when it really was about the banks and what the banks were doing. And the Supreme Court, in their order, acknowledged that there were judges and lawyers who agreed with me when they suspended me. And I think at the end of the day, had I made it, had I just had it was a choice I made. After many years of losing, I decided to take a more direct approach because there was law to support what I believed I could argue. But it definitely, resulted in, me getting in harm's way and giving them a chance to, I was suspended because I was impugning the integrity of certain judges. And, that, whether I agree or disagree is kind of irrelevant. I don't have the power to overrule them, but.
I was going to say to you, do you think that there is some form of vendetta against you?
I'll say it like this. I'm practicing law 25 years, and I believe that I practice law the way lawyers should, right? Like, I took depots, I did discovery, I fought every one of my cases from trial, from the complaint through the trial, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court and back. And, it was not so much a passion as it was a mission. Like, this was what I believed I was put here to do. And, looking back on it now, I just feel like there's, like, had I been working in a different area of law, had I not been involved against, what is such a unique place in the world right now, like what Thomas Jefferson is talking about, how banks are more dangerous than standing armies. Like, right now, these banks are not, they're very powerful in Florida and the rest of the country. And, I think my whether I'm targeted or whatever it is, I think that the work that I did had merit. I think that it was done with integrity. I think that, there's something else, left in my life that's going to happen, and I'm just moving forward and watching what comes before me, knowing that there's a path.
Well, one last thing on this subject matter, a personal interest to me. If we go back to 2008 and the robo-stamping that the banks were very keen on back then, and it, for me personally, I just felt, oh my goodness, everyone is just rotten to the core, and and just people who have got a rightful ownership of a property are losing it, and how is this ever going to end? So that's the question I'm going to ask you. Can you see an end to this? Can you see an end to the corruption? If that is not too strong a word.
I'll say it like this. I think that we're in a time of change. I mean, there is so much happening in our world in 2023, between the presidential elections, between the politics at the state courts and the state politics in Florida and everywhere else, to the climate change. I mean, the old Lahaina in Maui just burst into flames.
Yeah, sadly.
Yesterday. I mean, there's real challenges, and I think that that was part of my vision. Part of my belief was that we were going to help change the world for the better. Look, at the end of the day, if you're following the tenets of the Constitution, representatives are supposed to be representing the people. And eventually, if the people are not being, if we're not doing a good job, it's going to cause change whether we like it or not.
Sure.
So, my hope is that, people can start to see, we need to get back to, I think we don't need a new Constitution. We just need people to read the Constitution and start to follow it, and we'd be in a much better place.
Sure. Well, life is a path, and, your path led you to join our path, so to speak. And so you're kind of moving forward now. As I said, the situation that led you to this new career path that you have now in education, which I know is your passion. We've discussed this many times, and you've decided to align yourself with Property Onion Academy and our journey of education. Tell me why teaching and education is of interest to you.
So I'll say it like this. I do believe it is not by accident that we connected. I mean, when I don't know if it's okay to say, but when I first met you, you were doing something that I had been doing for a while, which was buying properties that had, liens against them and we were fighting them. And, to me, I've worked with real estate investors on my own. I'm an investor myself. There's so many layers to the onion of real estate, especially when you start looking at distressed assets and properties that are in, how do you get to these properties if you're not going to have a realtor show you around like the way most people do it? And how do you find profits? And, that was something that I enjoyed myself a lot. It was something I did, and it was a big part of my practice, and it was a big part of, money that I brought into my house and took care of my family with.
Sure.
And to me, they say those that can't do teach. So I can't practice law right now, right? So
it's one of my favorites.
Let me start teaching, and I'll say it like this: I love teaching. I've been teaching for the Scouts for years. I taught foreclosure defense strategies for years. I think it's one of my innate gifts that I'm able to talk to people and explain to them complex things in a way that is understandable.
Sure.
And to me, what I think is things are challenging right now in every area, particularly in real estate. There's less inventory or higher rates. There's all kinds of competition. There's everything is happening, and to me, when I spoke to you, I was just grateful for even the opportunity, that all played itself out. And I just see a vision that makes a lot of sense to me. There's a lot to teach people who don't understand real estate.
Sure.
and how to avoid the mistakes that brought them to me in the first place, and how to take advantage of all these opportunities that are out there if you understand how the system works.
Well, like everything, like any industry, any business is an angle to everything.
Sure.
And you've got to learn the angles, and who better to learn them from than someone of your great standing.
Thank you.
You've joined us as the director of business development, and the first thing you've done is identified 3 new courses that you want to introduce to the academy and teach. Can you explain what each one of those are and give a broad outline of what the detail is within each of those courses?
Sure. So, the first thing I asked you, Tony, was, well, what are people asking for? What do they want? What do they want to know about? And one of the first things we heard a lot about was people understand there's something about probate cases when people die, and how do you make money from real estate from that situation? And we've been developing this course. It's things that we've worked with and used for years, but now we're putting it into a course it's the Silver Tsunami course. So think about it this way: you have in Florida an aging population that is going to be passing, and it will be a tsunami of silver-haired people that are no longer going to have their properties. So what do you do to access them? How do you find them? How do you talk to the heirs? What do you have to know about the probate process so you can get the properties in a way that you can actually make money from it? And there are strategies. They do work. They are, cash in your hand if you understand how they work and how to put them in play. And that's our plan. We're going to, right now, the goal is to show people how probate property investing is a gold mine, and you can make a lot of money if you know what you're doing there. Another course we're talking about, we've been asked a lot about, is the surplus funds. So in Florida, if you have a property sold by an auction, either by a tax deed auction or a foreclosure sale auction, there's a surplus often. And what that means is that they paid off the judgment, they paid off the tax lien, and the property went for much more than that. And now there's money sitting in the court registry waiting for someone to collect it. But they don't tell people, hey, there's money there waiting for you. It's almost like a treasure hunt. And there's a business model to be made from that. If you can find the treasure, and then you can find the people that treasure belongs to, and get them to sign your contracts, and it's all regulated. You got to know what you're doing. You got to be careful. If you're not careful about it, either you'll lose out and you won't get paid at all, or you'll get yourself in real trouble, which you don't want to do. So, a lot of what we are going to be teaching are that, how to identify surpluses, how to find the people that are entitled to the surpluses, how to go collect those surpluses for them, and how to get paid from the court. When they cut that check, it comes to you, and you get your piece too. So that is, and the course number 2. And then course number 3 is going to be kind of, the goal is to build a real estate investor out of people who are coming to the site and trying to buy a tax deed or trying to buy a foreclosure sale. Like, being a real estate investor means so much more than one transaction. It's setting up your organization. It's finding the people, the team you need to put together. It's figuring out how to get to the deals before everyone else does. You don't have to wait to buy a property at an auction. A lot of times people get properties before they ever go to auction, because there are strategies and tactics that we will be showing. How do you get there? And then what do you do when you get the property? And how do you make sure that you can rent it and get it cleaned up and ready to go? Or maybe you want to flip it and do the construction. Like, putting together your teams. What are the tax implications for these things? What kind of professionals do we need involved? All of that is something that I've been working with seasoned real estate investors, doing it for 50 years, and they're ready to share their secrets and give their strategies, so that you have a fighting chance, right? If you are just walking into this business and you're fresh, the odds of you getting it's looking for blue water in a red ocean. You know, there's a lot of blood in the water right now.
I've always said that, you know, I wish that when I first started in this business in Florida all those years ago, I wish there was these sort of courses available for me when I first started. And you know, the amount of money I would have saved and the amount of time also would have been, you know, phenomenal. But, you know, we've got it now, thank God. And, you know,
Okay.
so you have bigger things planned for the Academy. Would you mind sharing with them, or with our viewers, what they are? I mean, obviously, you know, the first three courses are like short term. You know, you just get your feet under the table as the director of business development. What's next after that?
So, well, we're certainly going to be developing more courses and more strategies and more, you know, business in a box kind of ideas that people can benefit from. But the real vision I have, and the more I've talked to you, Tony, about what Property Onion is, you know, it is a site where you can get all kinds of great information about properties going to foreclosure sales and auctions and things like that. But it's also a community. You've got hundreds of thousands of people that are part of this website that are doing the same kind of work. And I believe in co-opetition. I believe that if you work together and you build your community, you start to create opportunities, right? And you can, you know, the goal that I have is to start teaching bigger classes and more groups and having us come together and work together and, you know, sharing how we're going after properties and kind of building teams that can be more profitable in their own world because they are getting the right coaching, the right advice, the right connections. You know, it's all about who you know in every business. And the more people that we can bring together, I think the more people are going to make money together.
Yeah, no, and I'm very much looking forward to that developing. Aside from property, what's your other interest in life?
So I am blessed with a beautiful wife, Michelle. I've been married 21 years, just 2 weeks ago, and I have 4 children. My oldest is 17 years old and going through that. You know, he's a lacrosse player, and you know, so is my 14-year-old, and you know, we're just family. You know, most of my interests are being around my wife and kids. You know, helping them do what they need to do. You know, I have a spiritual practice. It's been very meaningful to me for all my life, so I'll always have that. You know, and then just trying to make the world a better place, whatever way that looks like. You know.
Sure. It's been fantastic having you here, Bruce. Thank you.
I really appreciate the time.
He's came up from Miami, I should to say. It's an hour and a half you'll never get back.
It's worth every moment. I enjoy the opportunity.
I'm pleased that you came. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Well, I hope you found the interview interesting and understood Bruce a little differently than what you have read about him in the press. To join our website for free, you will find the link on the page accompanying this video. Similarly, if you want to learn about our academy or even my article on the HOA play, you will also find those links below. Until the next time.
Find a better deal, propertyonion.com.